concept of doomed romance has been in the minds and pages of society for hundreds of years, but, just like any other genre, it hasn't always been the same. Writers are always affected and shaped by their society and its values, as are the readers of their texts. Robert Browning's poems My Last Duchess and Porphyria's Lover are excellent examples of Victorian-era doomed romance texts, and his use of language expresses the genre in a unique way. The modern-day verse novel We Come Apart by Sarah Crossan and Brian Connigan is another text that explores doom romance, and its distinctive structure and gritty critique of Brexit Britain makes it a distinctly modern yet timeless example of the genre. Robert Browning lived in a Victorian England society, where values were largely shaped by religion, male dominance over women, and the social class system, and Browning's poetry was heavily reflective of these values. In My Last Duchess, the Duke uses a conversational but threatening tone, trying to establish control and dominance even in his speech. He does this with rhetorical questions that come across as demands, such as, "Wilt please you sit and look at her?" and "Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling?"
He seems to believe that the only way he can control his wife is for her to be dead, so that he can dictate any memories of her. This romance was doomed from the start, as the Duchess wanted to be free, but the Duke and his society was never going to let that happen.
Robert Browning effectively used themes of sex, murder, and the supernatural, which were incredibly popular subjects in this time period. In Porphyria's Lover, Browning's use of pathetic fallacy and gothic themes, personifying the world as a force acting against the main character and his love, is a perfect representation of romantic period texts. When Porphyria enters, she shut the cold out in the storm, then untied her hat and let the damp hair fall. This sensual imagery is the exact opposite of Victorian society's emphasis on sexual restraint and modesty, especially for a woman. The poem refers to Porphyria's hair multiple times, and it becomes a symbol of her power and sexuality, which is ironically what is used to kill her, turning her own power against her. The imbalance of power in both poems seems to make the men feel threatened, driving them to kill the women, switching the power back to what they believed was its rightful place. We Come Apart by Sarah Crossan and Brian Connigan is heavily influenced by British culture and events occurring at the time it was written. In the post-Brexit United Kingdom, 1 in 3 people believe that a major cause of division in the UK is conflict between people who have immigrated and people born there, and immigration was one of the biggest factors in Britain voting to leave the EU. A major cause of the doomed nature of the romance in We Come Apart is the racial tension and abuse between Nico and the rest of the people in his community, which ultimately destroys any chance of Nico and Jess having a life together. The chapter Worse Than Death from Nico's perspective is a good example of how the structure of the novel is utilised effectively to reflect the setting and doomed romance genre. This emotional, confessional-style chapter's brevity is demonstrative of Nico's struggle to communicate his feelings and express himself. The format in the second stanza is of single words on each line, listing off things Nico's teachers assume he doesn't know anything about. Numbers, words, history, science, facts, neat writing, behaving. This formatting causes the reader to go through the sentence slower, making it seem longer and Nico's situation more helpless. This is used again with things Nico does know about but the teachers never ask him. Books, music, ideas, horses, more. Effectively conveying Nico's inability to express himself and the teacher's inability or disinclination to see Nico as anything other than a criminal and an immigrant. The way doomed romance has been explored has changed significantly over time, largely due to changes in values and beliefs of the society writers have lived in. Both Robert Browning's poetry and We Come Apart have been written by British authors, set in England, and been written about romance that ends badly. However, these texts are vastly different to one another. Browning's poetry often focuses on male and female power difference, violence, and madness, especially in My Last Duchess and Porphyria's Lover. This clearly reflects the Victorian era that Browning was living in, as violence and madness were incredibly common and popular issues. His poems are distinctly Victorian, from the language to the themes used to tell a doomed romance story. We Come Apart explores the themes of immigration, domestic abuse, discrimination, and violence, from Nico's experiences as a Romanian living in England to Jess's life as a frequent shoplifter with an abusive stepfather. The novel's coarse dialogue gives it depth and realism, not leaving out any unsettling detail, but not gratuitously shocking the reader either. We Come Apart is a disturbingly accurate and critical look at the struggle of romance in a brutal world.